Hello, Javier. I'm looking here at your interview guide, and I would add a heading at the top, include the name of the university, language department. If you have a logo, you can include that, and any independent variables that you need to include. So any information about the teacher, the group itself, I would include that there here at the top. Now, it looks like this is for students, and so I would look and add key terms that very much relate to things that you are actually going to see in class. And I know it's hard to know exactly what you're going to be observing, but you can kind of anticipate at this point a few uh, things that you might see pertaining to your research questions that I think you can include here more specifically. And you can frame them as a question as you've done, or you can just include prompts as you've done here as well. So that's fine if you just want to list out, ask students about, but ask them about something that is more specific to your research questions and things that you might observe. So just to remind yourself that you are trying to focus more on things that you observe, not so much in general. So when you have a question, for example, you ask, when do they think errors are more common? Instead of asking that, you might ask, when you were responding to the teacher during this activity and he or she was saying this, and then ask, does that happen frequently? So you want to be more specific in your question, and so I would try to maybe provide some examples here that kind of prompt you again to try to focus a little bit more specifically in what you observe. If this is not clear, come by my office and we can talk about this, and obviously we can talk about it in our tutoring session. But the point here with the interview guide here is to prompt you to look for things that you observe. And I know you haven't observed yet, and the idea here is to try to create an interview guide now that would consist of likely questions that you might ask. But obviously, after you observe, you'll be modifying and adapting the interview to more specific questions after you have actually observed. So, okay, and I'm not sure exactly what you're referring to here in the note at the bottom. I'm not sure if this is necessary, but again, the interview guide is more for your purposes, something that you can have next to you when you're actually giving questions or asking questions to your participants. One thing that I would also consider is adding a list of question words so that you are prompted to ask different types of question words around the same topic or the same phenomenon or the same activity, whatever you are asking about, that you remember to ask different types of questions. Also, finally, I would add your research questions just somewhere, maybe at the bottom here, but that they are very much a part of your interview guide so that you, again, are reminded what's the general focus of your research, and that it's something that you can refer to before you begin your focus group or your interview. Again, just to make sure that you're focusing on the right questions. Okay, now your questionnaire here, I would move the logo over to the right, move this title up, or the text up to the center, and maybe single space so you can save some space. The idea here is you want to try to avoid a little bit of this white space here, and this would also bring this text up. The comments I was making in the interview guide, I think you can use this heading here as well. So you can basically use the same heading for all of your instruments. And there's no need to capitalize language teaching here, so I would change this to lowercase. I would say here are related to. Now you're not including a lot of information here. I would just make sure you reflect and see if you have enough information in the heading to help you. So remember that this questionnaire has helped you to achieve two things. First is it's to help you choose the participants for your study, and the second thing is you want to include any variables that you think might be useful, that might be included in your study afterwards when you also are considering your observations, your interviews, and so on. So any independent type variables that you think that you think might be necessary, that you might include later on. Since you're doing a case study, this would be information about the case itself, about the person or the group or the context. You would want that to be here as well. You'd want to include that here in this heading. So typically we have a little bit more information in this heading, so just make sure that you have included that information. For example, you might include information about how many groups this person has, what's the age level of the group. You have the English level, the academic level, but I don't see the age group, if that's something that is important or necessary. I'm not sure what you're referring to with regard to time studying English, if this is referring to the teacher or the student. I'm assuming the teacher, but you might ask questions like how long they've been teaching, how long they've been at this particular institution. You might even include their gender, their age. It all depends on what information you find that you will include later in your analysis. Okay, your first question here, I would change this to a how question and ask something like, how do you feel about being corrected by the teacher? Or how do you feel when teachers correct your grammar? Or how do you feel about the teacher, and particularly one teacher, how do you feel about the teacher correcting your English grammar? Now, you're asking a question here, when do you think you commit more errors, when you speak or when you write? Are you referring to the teacher? So I guess it's not clear if maybe this is for the student. It should be very clear if this is for students or teachers. And maybe at the top here, under name, either put student's name or teacher's name. It's not clear to me who the respondents will be for this instrument. Okay, so now you ask, how does the teacher? So I guess this is for the student. So it took me to, before I read this question, before I realized this is for the students. So here, time studying English, maybe years or duration. How long have you been studying? I would say years studying English. Maybe even a question about, do they study privately? Do they study outside the school system? That might be something that you might want to include to see how many students are only studying within the school system and how many students are actually studying privately outside the school system. That might be something. These are all examples and suggestions. So you need to decide if these are independent variables that relate to your research questions or not. But I think you would be better off having a few more than what you currently have. Okay, now, so you are asking these questions and you're not providing much space. So I would probably limit the number of questions and provide more space on this piece of paper and try to keep it no more than one sheet. If they need more space, perhaps they can write on the back. But I don't think you want to have too many questions for them. Try to think about how long it's going to take for them to fill this out, because you're going to be taking class time, I would assume. You don't want this to be too much of a burden for the students, so you might consider limiting it to around 15-20 minutes. Plan on how long it would take for them, and you are asking in English, so you may want to decide, depending on the age, the maturity level, and the English level of the students, you might consider writing this in Spanish. But if you do it in Spanish, you will need to translate everything. So those are some decisions you need to make. But try to keep all of these things in mind when you're looking and finalizing this instrument. And again, if you do have any questions about this, let me know. Okay, again, I would add a heading, as I've mentioned before. And you do have a title here. I would add a title on your student questionnaire. Okay, I think this is okay here, what you have. I would add your research questions just as a reminder, and also the question words. I think we spoke about this in our tutoring session. I would include the question words, just a list of the question words somewhere on here, so that you can kind of check off and make sure that you're asking a lot of different types of questions and not just the same types of questions. When you do your recording, make sure you listen back and see if you ask all the right questions, and that will also help determine if you need a follow-up interview later on, if you need to check something again or ask the teacher something that you missed the first time. But I think you could you have space here to add perhaps your research questions. You could do this at the bottom, and again, the question words can be just a list somewhere, leaving enough space for you to kind of check off as you go through the interview. And as you've done here, I would include space to take notes. So you might have like a section You might have the word notes, colon, and then have a space that you can jot down notes as you are conducting your interview. I would probably do the same for the students if you're going to be using an interview guide for the students. Okay, same comment about the heading. Bring that up. Same about here, the independent variables. Just make sure that you have enough independent variables, that you've included enough here in this instrument. Okay, I think I would avoid this question. This is a very specific question that you're asking, if they can identify certain types of error correction. So be careful when you are in the interview as well, that you don't want this to feel like an interrogation, like you are pressuring the teacher like it's a quiz, and just you want to ask questions more generally, and you'll be doing analysis and identifying the types of error corrections, but you don't want to necessarily ask the teacher if they know or if they can identify certain error correction techniques. They may be able to do so, but the point is not so much whether they can identify it, it's just to know or understand how and why they are implementing the types of error correction techniques in their class. So again, not so much about them being able to identify it, it's just what they are doing so that they can justify. They may not be able to identify any of the error correction techniques, but maybe they have a lot or are implementing a lot of different types of error correction techniques. So these first two questions, I think I would create one question, a how question, and ask something like, how do you implement error correction in your class? And just start from there and get some general ideas about how they're approaching error correction. And the how, they might indicate when. They might indicate which ones, perhaps. But you might, I think, get more mileage out of one question by changing or adapting these two, or replacing these two questions with a how question. So number 3, I think I would just check the grammar. Which errors do students commit the most? Or what are some common errors that students commit? Okay, number 4, I like number 4. That's a good question. Okay, I would take out question 6. You're looking into this, but this again, this is a questionnaire, and again, you've got too many questions. I would limit it to probably maybe 6 to 8 questions only, keeping it on one page, and again, thinking about the time that it's going to take for teachers to fill this out. And again, I wouldn't expect them to spend more than 15 or 20 minutes filling this out. Otherwise it becomes a burden. And at the end of this questionnaire, you're going to be asking them if they're willing to participate in your study, which you need to add. You need to list out all the ways in which you're going to collect the data, and the very last question of your questionnaire should be, are you willing to participate in this research that would include? And then you list out the things that this is going to include. You're going to record classes, you might interview students, you're going to interview teachers so many times. You need to be very specific, but in one question include all of these things so that he or she knows what to expect and can opt out if they want to, or they can agree to participate in your research. So make sure you add that. But again, I would cut back the number of questions and keep it limited here. And I think you can probably reduce the amount of information you have up here in your introduction. The following questionnaire is intended to collect information about teachers. The following questions are related to error correction. Any of the information would be... So like here, you could probably remove this sentence. I think the best thing here, if you're focusing only on grammar error correction, is just frame all of your questions with regard to grammar correction only, without starting general and then going into the specific questions. Just focus on grammar error correction only, and then you can kind of I think cut back on a lot of these questions. Yeah, so is there a special reason to correct these? I would avoid yes, no questions. I tell you what, go ahead and go through and limit your questions to, I would cut these in half at least, focusing only on grammar error correction. And when you've made those changes, you want me to look at that, let me know.